Can you hear it? Are you listening? God whispers to us. Can you hear him? Perhaps it is a feeling in our gut, a sudden insight, or a message that comes to us through his word. Or maybe it is the stillness of nature, or the blowing of the wind and the sound of waves crashing on the shore. Whatever form it takes, God is whispering to us now, inviting us to listen and respond. It is in these moments of quiet and stillness that we truly hear God's voice. And when we do, we have a choice to make. We can ignore it, dismiss it as just another thought or feeling, or we can embrace it and allow it to transform us from the inside out. God's whispers has the power to change us, to move us, to heal us. It can give us the strength and courage to face our fears, to overcome our doubts, and to take bold steps towards a brighter future. When we follow God's gentle whispers, it has the power to shake the world, to bring about positive change and make a difference in the lives of those around us. So can you hear it? God is whispering to you. Are you listening?
So a couple years back, in South Florida, of course, there was a little boy one day who decided to go swimming on a very hot summer day, and he kind of ran across the grass, and he dove into the water, and he started swimming to the middle of the little lake right there. And his dad was in the yard working, and he looked over at him, and he could see as he dove in that the gator that lived in that area was coming towards the shore. So they were now heading towards each other. And the dad ran across the grass, and he's screaming at his son, trying to get his attention. And finally, the little boy heard his dad, could see his dad was scared, and he turned around and swam as fast as he could to the shore. And as he got to the shore, his father leaned down and grabbed his arms, and at the same time, the gator grabbed his legs. And they had a tug of war. Also, because it's Florida, there was some guy driving by or somewhere who heard this screaming and hollering, and he happened to have a gun. And so he ran over there and shot the gator. And the boy was saved. And the little boy spent several weeks in the hospital, and when he was well enough to go home, a reporter came to interview him, and he pulled up his pant legs, and both of his legs were really wounded and mangled from the gator. It had been quite a fight. But then the little boy said, "Oh, but I got other wounds too." And he pulled up his sleeves, and he said, "I've got really good wounds. These are from my dad's fingernails because he wouldn't let go." So for the month of September, we're going to talk about some of the wounds that come from trauma in our lives. That day, that little boy experienced some trauma that would probably stay with him the rest of his life, understandably. But it turns out that a lot of us carry a lot of wounds from our past. Now, granted, some of them come from things on the outside. We can have things that happen to us in our lives, and we'll talk a little bit later on about what trauma actually means. But they all, whatever it is, it has an impact on you. It can have an impact on your relationships with people. It can have an impact on your job. It can have an impact on your relationship with God, how you feel about him, how you think God works. That's just normal. When we have wounds, it impacts us, and we have to learn from those. So during this month, we'll talk a little bit more about trauma, but I want to kind of just give you a definition so we're all on the same page of what I'm talking about when I talk about trauma. Trauma comes from the Greek word for wound. It's a condition characterized by the phrase, "I just can't seem to get over it." So that's the kind of thing we're talking about. Because people often have trauma and don't even know it. They just don't realize it. They experienced something and they dealt with it and they went on. And yet it still can have an impact on their lives. We're going to be preaching from a book that's going to kind of guide us through this topic. It is called No Longer Stuck by Tony Portell. And this is actually a friend of David's, and it's a really kind of amazing book. He's a pastor of a church, and he is educated in counseling, and he's got a really wonderful perspective, and we'll be using this book as our guide through the stuff we are going to talk about. But last week, on your way out, we did a little survey. We asked you to answer one question about where you are in life right now. And I have a slide to show you what, for those of you who filled it out, what the congregation looks like right now. So the question was, sometimes we can feel stuck in life. Where are you today? Simple question. I'm okay with season of life. That is the majority of the folks. But very close behind that is I'm ready for a new season. And then below that is a group of people who are feeling stuck in life. And I bring this up to you because I want you to understand that in our lives we have different seasons. And some seasons are wonderful and some seasons are not so great. And there are some seasons where we can just feel stuck. So let's talk about what Scripture says to us. And I want to read to us today about what Scripture says to us when it comes to feeling stuck. And we're reading out of Romans 12, verses 1 and 2. So, brothers and sisters, because of God's mercies, I encourage you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice that is holy and pleasing to God. This is your appropriate priestly service. Don't be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you can figure out what God's will is, what is good and pleasing and mature. So the Apostle Paul is writing a letter to the churches in Rome, and he's reminding them as followers of Jesus Christ that there's a reality to that, meaning that we as followers are transformed by God's grace. It literally shapes us. It makes us into the people he wants us to be. And, this is important to remember because a lot of times we think in terms of Jesus Christ about the sin in our lives. We all got sin in our lives. We got bad habits, sins we can't change. And we understand he comes to free us from those sins. But he also comes to heal us and transform us because if you live in this world, you're going to encounter trauma at some point. And he's a God that heals us. He understands the things we go to. This is what we know. We change through a work of God's grace. We let him transform us through the renewing of our mind. So I want you to know that's what he's offering us. So let's talk about these minds because God has given us these amazing complex brains. And this is stuff you probably all know, but I want to talk just a little bit. I want to remind you how the brains that God gave us, how they work. So, we all have very complex minds, and our minds are kind of broken into two parts. We are both left brain and right brain, and these are the hemispheres, and we're two different ones. And each side of our brain is dominant at certain times in certain situations. And let's see, so the left brain analyzes logic and facts and language and speech. Most of you probably learned this in school. And then the right side of your brain involves creativity, feelings, emotions, intuition, and expressing and receiving love. Now, the interesting thing is about it, while we may know we both have this right and left, there's a lot of misconceptions about the brain out there. There's a lot of pop culture that is not correct. So I want to dispel some of the myths about our right brain, left brain hemispheres, okay? So the first one, the brain comes online a year before the left brain, which makes total sense, right? Because think about babies. They don't come out talking and expressing their views. They come out gazing into your eyes and smiling and giggling. They're feeling and they're connecting to you. So a year ahead of the left brain, the right brain is developing and changing. And that's because God has made us into these very relational human beings. There's no coincidence about that. Secondly, we are not right-brained or left-brained. That's something people all think. No. We are both. Everybody I don't care what your personality is, we are both. Our dominant-handedness has nothing to do with being right-brained or left-brained. So if you got that kid or you're left-handed, it has nothing to do with this at all. You just happen to be left-handed, so just understand that. Right brain and left brain does not reveal your personality either. But instead, situations determine what side of the brain we are using. Okay. So now let's apply this to something that has to do with church. Let's talk about our right brain, left brain in worship. All right, so we know that the right brain involves creativity, feelings, emotions, intuition, and expressing and receiving love. And that's really, you use that in worship, right? That would be your feeling side of you. It's why people like to go to really, churches that are, old churches built, hundreds and maybe even 1,000 years ago that are just spectacular because you go in and you use your emotion and you look at the stained glass windows and you feel and you meditate and you pray. And that's what we're supposed to do in worship. But the minute the words go up on the screen and we start to sing a song, do you know your left brain is now invited in? And you are using both sides of your brain. We're not one without the other. We're using both. But are you using both? So here's a question. Some people, it's not everybody, but some people can't wait till the music and the praying part is done so they can get to the sermon. Because the sermon is where you get the facts. The sermon is going to have an impact on you. The sermon is going to make a difference in your life. You don't have to raise your hand, but that is how some people are wired. And it just simply means they're more comfortable in their left brain than they are their right brain. I started out that way. I didn't really want to feel in church. I wanted to learn. And I had to really be trained to use my right brain as well as my left brain in church. In fact, a lot of times I will close my eyes if I feel if my mind is just going and I can't focus in on what I'm doing, I close my eyes so I can really hear the music. Because you want to be both. Now, if you're not sure if you're both, here's something you can consider. When you're talking to God and you're praying, what's your prayer like? Think about it. Is your prayer life like a monologue of requests to God? Are you talking at Him? We all know people who talk at us. Are you talking at Him and telling Him your cares and your needs and your hurts and all that? Are you just talking at Him? Or are you being relational? Are you using both sides of your brain? So when I talk to my daughters or I'm talking to Gary, I'm using both sides because I am feeling and I am listening. And I am responding to what they say. It's both sides, and I'm feeling love, and I'm feeling all kinds of feelings because I'm connecting with these three people that I just adore. That's what your relationship, your prayers, that's the ideal prayer to God, where you're using both sides. So if you're not using both sides, you can just build in a little time to listen to God, a little time to just be silent. And that will feel weird because you are liking that left brain side, but it's okay. You have to train yourself to get comfortable with both sides in worship. All right, so God's given us these wonderful brains, but the reality is when you live in this world, our brains experience trauma. And trauma is the wounding of a brain, but it can be healed. That's really important to know. We can experience trauma, but it can be healed. Now, there's two kinds of trauma. And there's A trauma, which is things that should have happened but were absent in your early life. Let me explain. So maybe you had an absent parent. Maybe a parent died. Maybe you had an abusive parent, or maybe you did not get the unconditional love you need as a child. I mean, that just happens because we live very complicated lives. And this is actually the most complex of the traumas and a little bit harder to heal from this. But doctors believe that 55% of the population has what they call poor attachment, which has to do with that early trauma, that trauma A. So that's kind of telling. And if you think about it, it makes sense. We had imperfect parents who lived in imperfect times in imperfect situations. It's just not all perfect. And so trauma can happen. The second one, trauma, is B trauma. And these are bad things that have happened to us in life. Like the little boy that got grabbed by the gator. That is a trauma that he will have to deal with at some point in his life. Because just because his body heals doesn't mean his mind was not impacted by that. And so that's a B kind of trauma. And this might come from things like abuse, or maybe an accident, or a health issue, a divorce, a crisis of some form in your life. And it's actually a little easier to deal from B trauma, to heal, for God to heal you. And some of you don't have had this and you don't even experience it as a trauma. You're just like, oh, that's my life. But it was a trauma. And it's important to know that you may need to be healed of that. Just because you're used to it doesn't mean God doesn't want you to be healed. And so we need to put this in context of Jesus now. So Jesus tells this really cool story. One day he is out with some disciples, and he sees a man who's blind from birth. That's a particular kind of trauma. He's been blind from birth. And somebody says, of course, because as humans we always say stupid stuff, says, all right, who sinned that this guy was born from birth? Was his parents, or did it happen in vitro, kind of? Like, what is it, Jesus? And Jesus is like, no, that's not how it works. He was born this way. And then Jesus goes and interacts with him, and he heals him. He absolutely heals him. And that's just like wild when you think about it. And then Jesus goes on his way, and the man is just like he's never seen in his life. And so you can imagine he's probably loud, and everybody knows this is someone who's been blind since birth. I can't imagine. I just can't imagine the excitement he's feeling. Well, it kind of causes a little bit of a ruckus, and there's some Pharisees there, and they're questioning, These are all left brain folks, and they are questioning, is that from God or not? You just got healed. We're not sure what we think about this teacher. Is that a real healing? And the guy's kind of like, are you kidding me? I can see. What do you mean? Of course this is from God. Why wouldn't this be from God? I can see. And they're kind of working through it in their mind, and there's a debate among the different religious leaders, and Jesus hears about the debate. He hears that they're arguing about this amazing thing. And so Jesus comes and finds the guy. And this is the amazing thing, because he goes and he finds the guy he has just healed, and he begins to talk to him. And he basically is saying, okay, now the real healing is inside of you. You need a relationship with God. We like to say that the real healing is the healing of his eyes, but in reality, the real healing is a relationship with God. It's the internal healing that he experiences. That's the true healing. I have known people who were never healed of disabilities, but will tell you it's the healing of the heart, which changes everything. And so Jesus is talking to this guy, and he's teaching him with things that this man might understand, which is sheep. People in the early first century, they understand sheep because sheep are a reality for everybody. And he says, I am the shepherd. But not only am I the shepherd, I'm also the gatekeeper, the gate of the sheep pen. That's kind of an interesting thing. So he's saying, I'm the shepherd, but I'm also the gate, the gate through which the sheep come into the pen. And anybody else that is arguing with you, those are the thieves. So this is a pretty insulting thing he has said about the Pharisees. But they are missing the miracle. They are missing what is right in front of them. And he says, those are the thieves. And then he says this, and I want to read to you out of John 10. So Jesus spoke again, I assure you that I am the gate of the sheep. And all who come before me were thieves and outlaws, but the sheep didn't listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and they will go out and they will find pasture. The thief enters only to steal, kill, and destroy. I came so that they could have life indeed, so they could live life to the fullest. In other words, Jesus came to heal us of our trauma. Even if you're comfortable with it, even if you're resigned to the impact it has on your life, Jesus came to heal your trauma. Because the most important work he ever does is the internal healing in our lives. Because he wants us to be free. That's an amazing God. He knows when we're not experiencing the fullness. He knows when we're not being relational with him. Oh, we believe it in our mind. We like the idea of God, but we're not experiencing from both sides of our brain. He knows that. And he's not satisfied, and he wants more of us.